Thank you for joining me on a quilting tale today. My name is Shaylin, and this video is part 2 to one of my most popular videos, which I filmed about a year ago. It was English paper piecing tips for beginners, and I've been working on my extravaganza quilt, which you can see the blocks behind me. I've picked up more tips, more tools that I have found helpful, and I've branched out into some other shapes, so I want to share all of that in this video. If you haven't watched the first one, I'll link it below, but that one covers materials that you'll need and materials that are nice to have. I talk about how to prepare the shapes using glue basting. I don't demonstrate thread basting because I'm just not a fan of threading needles, and so I prefer the glue basting method. So that's what I demonstrate in that video, as well as how to fussy cut and attach edges using the whip stitch. And so there's a lot in that first video. This one is going to cover a special knot that a viewer suggested that has been a game changer for me. I'm also going to share a couple more tools that I've since started using that I've found helpful. And then I want to share how I connect the pieces to actually build different shapes. So connecting multiple edges, and then I talk about what to do with those shapes after you're finished with them. How do you turn it into something usable? So we'll get into all of that, and like I said, I want to branch out into other shapes, and so I attempt curved shapes in this video, so you'll see how those turn out, and I'll talk about some different seam allowance sizes, the pros and cons of those. So there's a lot I'm going to get into. I hope you enjoy this and find it helpful, and that it gives you more confidence to try English paper piecing if you've been on the fence about it. So let's dive right in. Before we talk about connecting pieces, I wanted to share a product that I've found very helpful when you're traveling with your EPP. I got this during Amazon Prime days. It was on sale. It's by OmniGrid, and it's just a portable cutting mat and pressing mat that just velcros shut here. And I've put a little needle minder on the tab here, and that's been really helpful, you know, when I'm cutting pieces or just need to set my needle down. You know, I'm working with this on my lap or wherever while traveling. Now if you want to close it completely, you'd need to take that off. But because EPP deals with such small pieces, this cutting mat is a great size, and the little pressing board is just right, you know, for pressing your individual shapes or when you have your piece all attached and you need to give it a final press. So this has been just a great little traveling companion. I just wanted to throw that out there. But let's talk about connecting our shapes now. This is an accent piece for the extravaganza quilt that I'm currently working on. And so in my last video, I showed you how to whip stitch just 2 edges together. So I'm not going to go into great detail about that again. But when you're ready to attach all the pieces, there's more than one way you can do it. What I like to do, or how my mind works, is to think in terms of rows. I want to connect edges together and then to knot and start a new thread as little as possible. So when I look at a shape like this, I would whip stitch this edge, and this edge to get a 4 hexy row. And then I do the same thing with these 3 pieces, and then these 2, and then this one isn't attached yet. But then I would be connecting the rows. And the reason I like to do rows is because you can, you know, start with one edge and then just do a continual stitch with one long piece of thread. Now if it's a really long row, you might have to get another piece, but I like to cut the thread as little as possible. So this is why I do it. this way. But you know, you could also sew in little segments here and connect all the edges, and then connect these three to these three pieces, for example. You know, just whatever works for your mind and, you know, how you look at things. But the idea is to get them all connected. So I'm going to do rows, and I look for rows when I can. So let me show you how I would connect an edge one more time. This is going to be similar to my first video, except I do want to share a special knot that a viewer informed me about. I'll show you when I sew this edge. Then I'll get the rows together and show you how I connect them. I'm going to take a break from whip stitching my edges together to explain the knicker knot, which I've been using with every edge I connect. You're still going to whip stitch, but to secure the beginning and end of an edge, the knicker knot will help strengthen your stitches and hopefully make them more unlikely to come undone, you know, through washing or just moving your pieces around. So this was suggested to me by a viewer who watched my first EPP video, and I watched a video by Sue Daly demonstrating how to do it, and a couple others, because I have a hard time visually imagining knots, and I'm going to try and film it so it's up close and it's really clear how to do this. So I have it on the green background here. I had tried it earlier with some of my first pieces that I connected, and I felt like it wasn't showing up well, so I'm going to try it again. I'm on my next row here that I'm getting ready to start. So like always, you're going to put the two pieces you want to attach right sides together, and this was the edge here that I wanted to connect. I'm going to start a little inside the edge because I don't want my quilter's knot, this knot right here, that stops my thread from going through. I don't want it to be in the very corner, giving more bulk where other pieces are going to connect. But I will put my knicker knot there. So I'm going to go back to the corner, and I'm starting on the right side of the edge. I find this side to be a little more straightforward than when you do the knicker knot on the other end, and I'll show you why in a moment. But you're going to push the needle not quite all the way through. You're going to take the thread that is on the front side, or near the pointy side of your needle, and you can see right now, hopefully you can see, this isn't a very dark thread color, but you can see that it is on the left side of my needle. I'm going to cross it over to the right, and I'm using my middle finger to hold it down to the hexes. Then I'm going to take the two strands of thread that come out of the eye of the needle, and since I went to the right, I'm going to take these and cross them over left, and I'll also hold those down. Now, I don't know that it makes a difference. I've tried it several ways. You know, do you cross first to the left and then the right, or vice versa? I don't think that matters as long as one's going to the left and one's going to the right. So now I'm going to pull my needle, and I'm going to do this slowly. If it gets caught on one of the corners of the hexes, just lift it. But I'm going to pull this part slowly because you can see it makes this little loop here with a flat edge where the thread is going to knot. So you should see that, and then pull it tight. And that is the knicker knot. And then I'm just going to whip stitch all the way around. And I mentioned before, if your quilter's knot has a tail, I just sew that down into the seam. I figured instead of cutting it close where, you know, it might unravel later or something, it just seems like it should be more secure to sew it down, that it would be less likely to come undone. But we're going to take just small little stitches, maybe a 1/16 of an inch or so. This is a 1-inch hexagon. I had another viewer ask me, how do you measure hexagons? You know, is it from point to point? Or With these hexagons that are all equal size sides, it's just referring to the length of a side. So in this case I'm using 1-inch hexagons. And so to give you an idea of how many stitches, I usually do about 20 on a 1-inch side. So I'm just barely going past the last stitch I made. And again, you want to just capture just a thread or two of the fabric. You don't want to go through your paper. So if you feel it, you know, like resistance, it's getting stuck on the paper, move up a little bit. But I will come back and show you how I close off the edge with the Knicker Knot. Alright, so here I am getting close to my edge. I'm going to just do one more whip stitch here, finish that off. And now when I get to my very corner, make sure it's going through both pieces of fabric. Same thing, but this time the thread at the front, the single piece, is on the right hand side. So you could cross over to the left and then take your two pieces that are in the eye, and I want to cross over to the right. Now I still want it to either cross over or under my needle, so I'm going to cross under the needle but to the right, and then when I pull it through, let's see if I can put my fingers here to make that show up better. You want to see that little knot forming and then tighten it. And then when you're at the end, you can just cut it. I leave a little bit of a tail poking out. You can see that you can't really see the stitches because we've just done those small ones and not gone through the paper. And so that's the Knicker Knot, and it just seems to make for a more secure stitch line. So much so, when I had made a mistake and needed to move pieces around and used my seam ripper, I had a hard time ripping from the edge. So what I would suggest, if you do find you need to seam rip, is get your seam ripper down in the middle and rip to one edge, and then back in the middle rip to the other edge to get through that Knicker Knot. But I do see a difference. I don't have loose edges, you know, things coming undone as you attach it to other pieces. It seems to make it very secure. So thank you to the viewer who suggested the Knicker Knot. Alright, I've got my 3 rows sewn together and I have my top here. So before I show you how to connect the rows, this is just a reminder that you would want to press here. And I say press, so don't iron back and forth, but just hold the iron down so you don't distort your shapes. Just for a few seconds. And get them nice and flat. I'll just do this top one for good measure too. It's already been pressed. Okay, so now these are all flat and we're ready to sew. So I would start with a long piece of thread, just so you don't, you know, from maybe your wrist to elbow or a little longer, I usually do. You don't want it to tangle and be too long, but get a long piece of thread and I'll show you how we can start connecting these first rows. Alright, so the first 2 rows I want to attach are these 2. And so you're going to look for the first seam, which is going to be this one from here to here. And so you're going to just put right sides together so those seams are aligned. And so this threw me off at first. You're almost expecting, you know, you're almost expecting something like this, like, oh, I'll just fold it over, but you can see that that won't work. So it's not going to just fold over on itself. You have to just always pay attention to the current edges you're attaching. So it's going to hang down a little like that, And I just keep my fingers pinched there so I don't lose track of which. It's very easy to confuse the edges you're going to sew. So, you know, you could put a clip or a sew tight magnet or just pinch with your fingers. But you're gonna just do the same thing. So I'm gonna get my quilter's knot a little bit away from the edge. I'll do my knicker knot in the corner. Okay, so cross over. Now cross over to the opposite side, pull. Okay, and then I'm just gonna whip stitch across like I've been demonstrating. When I get to the end of this edge, I will show you what I do, because you're not gonna cut it off this time. You're not gonna cut the thread, you're gonna keep going. Alright, I'm ready to close off this edge. So just like before, I'm going to do a knicker knot. Before, in my first video, I was double knotting. You could do that too, but I've just enjoyed this knot here, so I'm going to go under this time. Remember, you just want to cross opposite sides of the needle. Okay, so that is secure. I've pulled it tight. Now, I'm going to open it up again. And I can see that that edge is attached, so the next one is this one. So what I'm going to do now is right sides together with those two edges I want to attach. And this is where you'll feel the paper bend a little, and that's okay. It's flexible, but you want to keep going now across this line, so you don't need to cut your thread off. So I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to put it in the corner of the start of my new edge. Remember, this can bend. You don't have to crease it, but just let it bend naturally. You'll press it later to flatten it again. Now, I do another knicker knot here. I know I just did one, but I just feel like it just strengthens the stitches, and so you can just throw them in as often as you'd like. But at the start and end of an edge, I like to put them in. And if it gets caught on a corner, just loosen it, pull it tight, and then we're going to just whip stitch across again. When I get to the end of this edge, I'll do another knicker knot. Watch for it to catch, for your thread to catch on things. If you don't, you might end up with these little loops later on that didn't get pulled all the way through. When I get those, if I didn't notice it and it's been several stitches, what I do is just pull that loop, align it with the seam, and whip stitch over it to keep it down. If I catch it and I've only gone a couple stitches past it, I usually just take the thread out of my needle, undo it, and then redo those stitches. But the easiest thing to do is just to check each time that you are not looping on anything, that the thread is going all the way through. This is such a strange angle to be sewing on. I want to put it down on the mat here, but I'm trying to keep it in the camera view and watch what you're seeing. So I apologize if my sewing goes out of frame from time to time. Anyway, let me get to the edge and I will show you the next step. Okay, so I'm at the edge again. I'm gonna do my knot. Make sure it doesn't catch. And by the way, if you lose track, I usually say to myself, crossover right, crossover left. If you do, crossover right and crossover right by mistake or something, you should see that it's not making a knot when you pull it. You can pull it slowly, and if you realize, oh, it's not knotting, then just, go back and redo it. But there's my second edge attached. So now we want this one. So again, we're going to fold it right sides together, keeping track of that edge. You'll get paper bending on one side, your piece sticking out on another, and just keep going. So hopefully this process is making sense. I'm going to go over to the left and cross over to the right and under and pull tight. But you're just always paying attention to one edge at a time. Now, if your thread gets short and you're not done, whether you're doing the double knot to close it off or the knicker knot, you want to make sure you have enough thread to pull over your needle. So when you start to get short, you can stop and double knot or knicker knot anywhere on the edge. You could be in the middle of it. You would just knot it off and then cut the thread, then make another quilter's knot in a new piece, and just pick up where you left off. Maybe go back a stitch or two with your quilter's knot. Just try and keep it out of the very corner, and then just continue on your way. So eventually you will need a new piece, and it probably won't be perfectly at the very end of your rows, so that's not a big deal. But I like this part after you've sewn them in rows. You don't have to cut the thread so much. You can just keep going, and I'm just not a fan of threading needles and knotting it. I prefer to do that as little as possible. So this way works for me, and I'm sure there are other ways that people attach their pieces, but like I said, this is just how my mind works and what seems the most efficient to me. Alright, my first two rows are connected, and you can see from just bending the paper that it is not lying flat, so I'm just going to take my iron and press it flat. Before I connect the next row. I like to start with the longer rows when I can, because then it just seems like it goes quicker after that. There's fewer seams to attach, but again, there's no one right way to do it. So that's flat again. And now I'm going to take these two, I'm going to do the same thing. I want this edge connected first, so I'll fold it down this way and sew that edge and keep going. So I'm almost there. I'll show you when I'm done a few more tips. Alright, there is my finished piece. And something else that I wanted to address that came up in the comments of my first video was about removing the pieces. So in some of my earlier extravaganza blocks, I took all the pieces out. The reason for that being, I have a pack of 300 of them and they're reusable, and I'm going to need more than 300 for this project, so I was taking them out to use them again. But many viewers commented on, you should leave them in, and I agree, it holds the shape much better when you leave them in until it's time to applique them on or attach them to other segments of whatever it is you're making. So for something like this, the center is the only piece that is completely enclosed by other pieces, so I could remove that center piece and then leave all the others that are going to be sewn to something else. Now if you removed those pieces like I did here, this is a block I made probably a year ago or so. I started this project in March of 2023, and you can see a lot of these have still held their shape. I've kept them in this long box so that they don't get crumpled, but you can see some of them, like this one down here, has been bent. And so what I'm going to do with these pieces when I'm ready for them is just, their folds are still intact, and so I will just press those pieces down again, just to reform their shape. But there's still a little bit of glue in there. There's still the fold to help me, you know, see where to press them down again. So I agree that keeping the paper in does help maintain the shapes until it's ready to attach, but it is possible to take them off as long as you're not wadding up your blocks somewhere. You know, those folds should hold, and you'll be able to, you know, give them those nice sharp edges again. So that again is a personal preference, or maybe a resource preference. You know, how many hexagons do you need? How many do you have? But yes, that was a great tip from some viewers, to keep the papers in to hold the shape. All right, let's talk about finishing your project. Now these again are going to be accents on a larger quilt I'm doing, but let's say that I've attached these, and this would not be a big quilt obviously, but let's say I've attached a bunch of pieces and I don't want any borders. I just want, you know, a big quilt of my shapes here. So something you could do is, let's say this was my top edge here. I could take a ruler and just align it at these points here and just cut across, you know, just cut these little tips off here at the edge to get a flat line. And you could do it on each side. Obviously you'd need more coming out this way, but you could, you know, if I were trimming here, if that were the side point, I could just trim here and up here, and then, you know, quilt and bind as usual. So you could trim, but what a lot of people do, and what I'll be doing in this project, is appliqueing. So these aren't ready to be appliqued onto my quilt, so I'm going to show you a different project that is ready for some applique. So I attempted to teach my 3rd graders how to English paper piece, and you know, these are 9-year-olds, and this was, for a lot of them, their very first time sewing and using a thread and needle. And so I just gave them hexagons, a bunch of fabric, and let them come up with, you know, shapes that they like. And so they picked background fabric, and they've been working on sewing them. And we did this at the end of the school year, you know, as a little break during state testing until the end of the school year, which wasn't that much time. And so I told them, you know, I would finish this for them. A lot of them got their shapes made and started sewing them on, and so I'm just going to finish them. A lot of them did the little flower shape with the hexagons here. And so I had them just tuck their needle in. I told them I would finish it and get these all quilted for them, so they can see it in the hall when they come back as 4th graders. So yeah, here's just a little sampling of what they were able to do. This one wanted to leave a little gap on the inside, so they really did just get to do whatever they felt like they liked and pick the fabrics they liked. And it was a really neat thing to watch them do, you know, when they had indoor recess, which is really unusual for June. They were asking, can we work on our EPP? And a lot of them said this was one of their favorite things they did this year. They were really proud of themselves being able to sew and see what they come up with. So they're anxious to see these finished. So that is one of my end of summer projects. I need to get this done. There's some kids who didn't get this far and get it on background. I told them I'd just make it accent. I'd just use what they made as accent pieces in the quilt. So let me just demonstrate on one of these how to applique the shape on. So the first thing you're going to want to do if you're appliquing it onto a piece of fabric is just make sure the fabric is ironed nice and flat. These were at one point, and then they came home, so you know, I might need to go through and just get out a couple little creases or something. But when you're ready to applique, you can do a couple things. You can pin, making sure it's flat on the background fabric, and this one has already started to be appliqued, but I'm going to finish it. As you can see, it's not totally down. When you pin, you should pin toward the outside, so the point of the pin is toward the outer edge, because when you smooth and straighten, you don't want to poke yourself. So you know, pin to the outside is one tip. Okay, so you can smooth it out and not poke yourself. What I like to do, and if you had a lot of these to applique on, you know, pins are probably the way to go. But what I like to do is just take a little bit of glue and just on the little points of the hexagons, just a little dab of glue and press it down. Same thing right here, a little dab of glue, press it down. And that will also keep it in place. Now you can sew multiple pieces together and then stitch them on background squares or rectangles and then sew those together with your machine. If you don't want a bunch of background in your fabric and you don't want to, you know, cut your hexagons, you could applique to border strips and then just have borders going around, and then the middle is nothing but your shapes. So far I've just used hexagons, but because I think they're a simple shape to start with. But same idea with the others. You'd applique the same way, attach them the same way that I've been demonstrating. So whether you're continuing, you know, you've already started appliquing, or this is your first stitch, you're going to do this the same way. You're going to come, I'm going to actually turn it this way, feels more comfortable to me, so I'm going to find where she left off, right about here. I'm going to come up through the background fabric and the hexagon, and remember the papers are all removed at this point, just on the edge. I come up through, and then anytime I go down, I'm going to just go through the background fabric. So I'm going to go down by the last place I came in. I feel a little poke on my finger, and that tells me go back up. So I'm going to go up through the background and through the hexagon, and then pull up. We're going to do a hidden stitch here. And so I'm going to go down again by where I came in, just through the background fabric. I feel that little poke on my finger. I'm going to come up through both the background and hexagon, really close to the edge. And I'm just going to keep doing that. I don't want to pull it too tightly because I don't want to get puckers, but I also don't want to see the thread. And she has a little bit of thread right here, a loose piece I'm going to pull off there. Okay, so I've just come up, so now I'm going to go down and up, and I'm just going to follow the outline of the shape. I'm going to keep doing this, and from time to time you might set it down, make sure it's still flattened out. Sometimes, you know, you can fold fabric under and sew more than you meant to, so once in a while I would put this down and just make sure that it's still nice and flat. This is the other reason I like the glue instead of the pins. You can see how I'm holding where a pin might be, and I'm just less likely to poke myself. So because the sew line glue is more expensive, when I did this with the third graders, I just use the regular Elmer's glue stick. You can use the white one, you can use the disappearing purple, but that's what we use because I have a bunch of those and it works fine as well. The sew line is nice because the pen is so small, and so, you know, you can be more precise with where you want to put the glue down, but the Elmer's glue stick, just the washable school glue stick, works fine as well. You just, really want to use the edges, the rim of that. Okay, so I just came up through the point there, and so I just will rotate a little bit, go down next to it, feel that little poke in my finger, come up through both pieces of fabric, and I just keep going till I either run out of thread, and if you run out of thread, I'll show you how to do the knot, or if you just reach the end, it's the same kind of knot. We're just going to tie it off with a double knot, but it's really just a easy way to zone out and so relax. I like this part. It goes pretty quickly, and the stitches, like I said, they're pretty hidden. You don't see them, and so if you use the same thread, you can use matching thread color, or like I've been using here, this 80 weight polyester thread. I mentioned it in my first video. I'm just still using it. That's what I use with the students as well, and it's just worked out very nicely. Okay, I'm getting to the end here. I just have a few more stitches and then I'm back to where the student started, or like I said, if you're just running low on thread, you do the same thing. So let me I'm gonna go just maybe a stitch or two past where she started. So that should be good right there. I'm just kind of putting my nail under, and I don't feel any, gaps or anything. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down through the background fabric, right next to where my last stitch came out of. Go down through the background fabric, pull it all the way through, and then I'm just going to go under, like try and get my needle between the hexagon on top and the background fabric, so I don't see my needle on this side. I'm going to just try and get it in between and just take a little stitch there, pull it, you'll see that little loop forming. I'm going to go under the loop and under the loop again, and then pull tight, just a double knot. And then I can cut. Now, if that was just me running out of thread and needing to keep going, I would do the same thing, and then I'd get a new piece of thread, make a quilter's knot, and maybe back up a couple stitches, go underneath, just like I did to start with when I first demonstrated this. But now this is appliqued on. Whether it was going to be a block in another quilt like I'm planning on doing, or this could be a pillowcase it's being appliqued to, or a zipper pouch. You can put your little pieces and designs that you make on just about anything you can sew through. So you'd use that same method there. So that's attaching the pieces, or ideas for finishing a project with the shapes that you make. Here's the back if it helps to see. That's where I ended and started, so you can barely see the path there. The thread is pretty light, and I go down here and I start here, and then my student did the rest of them, so I just want to show you my stitches here. But you can see that little line that it makes on the back. One more thing you can do if you do applique to a background like I've done here, this isn't really an issue because it's darker, but let's say that you used a white or a lighter fabric, and so the background is shadowing through, you can see it. So something you could do is lift the background and really make sure it's separated from the applique shape on the front, but you could just snip, somewhere in the middle, making sure you're not cutting through the front, the top piece, and then just snip about 1/4 inch away from your stitches, and then you can kind of follow the lines and just snip 1/4 inch away from your stitches, and that way there's nothing behind that. It would just be your batting later if you're turning this into a quilt. But that's something you could do to help with shadowing. Not an issue in this one, but just a thought that you might run into. I wanted to address a couple more supplies, some new ones, and a clarification. I mentioned the Omni-Grid traveling mats, the pressing and cutting mats. These are also nice, like I said, if you're working on your lap. I did this in the car, but when I had all my pieces loose and I didn't want them coming apart and turning around, I could just secure them in here, and it's nice and flat, and they're not falling out. So that was nice for that, even if you're not traveling, just to keep your pieces straight. One thing I wanted to clarify, a little embarrassing, I film looking at the small screen of my camera, and so when I was looking for the size of the sandpaper that I use to keep things from slipping, I did not see the size when I was just looking in my little camera lens, but this is size 400. It's X Fine Finishes. So the size was on there. In fact, it was all over in several places, but I just didn't notice it. I was trying to look for what grit sandpaper I was using. So I had that pointed out a couple times in the comments. But then this was the other thing that I found really helpful. I got this for Christmas this last year, so after I started my EPP project. And so this is just like a booklight. I'm trying to do this one-handed, but it is bendable. When you turn it on, it has different settings, so you can do, you can see both lighting up here, but you can do white light, warm light, yellow light, and then you can, another button increases the brightness. It has this comfortable little padding to go around your neck, and it charges with a phone charger. So this has been really helpful, especially when you're not sewing in a well-lit place. So this little booklight, you can search bendable booklight or something. There's all kinds of different brands and colors and things, but I got this for Christmas and just really love it and would recommend it. So to part, I want to just share some upcoming projects and practices I'm going to be doing to branch out from the hexagon shapes. So I went to a shop on Etsy. Here it is here. You can see it's Elise Baek, I think is how you say it, .com. And then she also has an Etsy shop where I purchased these. I purchased the 1-inch jewel pieces, and I got some of the papers, but I also got the template to help with fussy cutting. And so I chose the 1-inch, and you can tell by looking at these that not all the sides are 1 inch. So it's referring to the shortest size here. So if you have a shape that does not have equal side lengths, hopefully if you're purchasing online, you can't measure in person, there's a diagram showing you. But I chose 1 inch because I have all these 1-inch hexagons, and so you can see if I put these jewels around them, I can make a little floral shape with pointed petals, or you can turn them inward where the points are all inside and it makes another floral shape. So those are all using the jewel shape. So I figured I could trace some of these to make more just on a lightweight cardstock. Something else I'm going to try, this shop offered 1/4 inch seam allowances and 3/8 inch seam allowances, which is just slightly bigger. And just from reading the descriptions, it sounds like the 3/8 was more popular. I'm not sure why. I know it would use more fabric, but you are going to get a slightly larger seam allowance, and so I'm going to try it out. I just thought I'd see if I noticed a difference in how they came together, or if there's a benefit. I'd be curious if you prefer 3/8 1/8 inch of a seam allowance, why that is, or if you prefer 1/4 inch, feel free to share. But I was noticing both options available, so thought I'd give that a try. The other thing I'm going to be making from the same online Etsy shop are these May blossoms. I thought these were really pretty. My computer doesn't print in color, unfortunately, because they look a lot prettier online. But this time I decided to just buy the digital download. And so they came in 3 sizes, 3/4 inch, 1 inch, and 1 1/4 inch. And so I just printed these. I'm going to do the 1 inch size, which is kind of the medium petals. And I just used 65 weight cardstock paper that I just found on clearance at Joann's and printed it there. So I'll just cut these out and then do 3/8 inch seam allowance around them to make the petals. So that has the pentagon shape and a petal shape. And I also purchased her template, again the 1 inch, because you want to make sure it matches the size you select. This is kind of the medium size, with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So there's the left and right petal if I want to fussy cut anything there. So these ones I can just keep printing. These ones, when you buy the papers, you might have to just trace to make more or just buy more. But this is nice because I can just cut them out. So I'm going to give these a try. I'm not making a big quilt or anything with them. I just want to try them out for now and test out that 3/8 seam allowance. So I'll let you know what I think about that. I thought the May Blossom design would be better to try out just because some of the petals have curves, and so that might be more interesting to see is what to do with curved pieces. One thing I noted watching Elise's video, because this is her EPP design, and I'll link it at the bottom if you want to see it more in depth, but she had mentioned when you cut out the pieces, if you print them out from the PDF, you know, depending on if you cut right on the line or just outside the line, when you put them together, they might overhang just a little bit on the pentagon. And so if that's the case, she said, you know, always cut from the straight edge, just a little sliver at a time from the straight edge. Don't cut around the curve, because there's a straight line here that you're going to need for sewing later. So again, I'm just going to wrap these. I want to see what it's like to wrap with the curve and try that 3/8 seam. So that's as far as I'm going to get on here, because I don't really want to dive into a whole new project. So I'm going to use my templates that I ordered with the PDF to help me cut the fabric. You can also rough cut and do it loosely, try to get 3/8 of a seam allowance, but I want to get a sense of what it's really like, so I'll use the template. And so there's just this protective paper to peel off of them. Get a nail under there. Looks like a little bit of the paper sticks in the words there, but it says May Blossom 1 inch, and then it has her website, EliseBaek.com, and this is the pentagon. I already pulled it off the petal here. It says petal left is correct, or when you flip it this way, petal right is what you can see, and it doesn't look backwards. So we'll use this template for both petals. So I'm going to just cut some fabric first before we wrap, but I have all my pieces cut out. I printed them again from the PDF. And just in case you're curious about the fabric I'm using here, this is eventually going to be part of a quilt for my grandma who loves Japanese cherry blossoms, and so this line is called Lotus and Koi. And it's called Blossoms Navy Yardage. I got this from Missouri Star Quilt Company, but I've seen it in lots of other shops. And then I just got a solid navy for the center. This is American made brand cotton solids in navy blue, which I also got at the same time from Missouri Star. Okay, since this is a darker fabric, I'm going to use this white pencil and see if it shows up a little better for cutting out. Got my sandpaper underneath to keep everything from slipping. I know that doesn't show up very well on the camera, but I can see the cutout. Then I'm going to flip it to do the left side petal. I'll just cut these out. And remember, you can always rough cut these. This is to get that exact 3/8 inch seam, and if I want a fussy cut with this print, I don't think there's any need to. There's one. Look at that cute little selvage with the koi fish. I love that. Okay, I'm gonna just press my pentagon just out of frame here. And when I attach the first two petals, I want to make sure that they don't overhang. So these look like they'll sew perfectly without sticking out past the pentagon. So they are ready to wrap. So I'm using, I can see a little bit of the cutout line. That's going to be my front, and I want it to match the front of my fabric here. So you can see with the 3/8 there is a lot of seam allowance that I'll have. And when I glue with a curve, first thing I'm going to glue, and this was according to Elise's directions, the long straight edge first. Again, we want to avoid going right up to the edge. And fold down. And now I'm going to do the curved side. And there's a little point on this. Let me see if I can get a marker here. There's a little point where the line is straight and then it starts to curve, which is about right here. And so I'm going to do that portion first. And so I'll have this bit sticking out. We'll take care of the ends at the end. And then for the rest of it, there's going to be some bunching or puckering to get it to go around the curve. So we're just going to kind of smash it in there, and you'll get a little bit of puckering just so you can go all the way around the curve. And with this big seam allowance and these small pieces, you don't really see much of the paper. And now we're going to just take care of the ends. So you want to make sure that the seam allowance is flush with the straight edge. You don't want it sticking out past. Just really smush it down there. Add a little more glue if need be. And same thing right here. Some glue there. Make sure that it's flush, not sticking out past the straight edge. And so there is the first petal. This is the right side petal. So we'll do it again with the left side. So one more time. Straight edge first. This time I think I'll just put the band all the way around the curve, a little bit onto the fabric too. Then I'll do the straight edge of the straight portion before the curve, I should say. Push that down. And then I'll just start tucking it. And then I can do the smaller ends. Okay, so there's that piece. I'm going to press them now, and then we'll hold it up to the pentagon and see how that looks. Okay, so we'll just press down, and this will help flatten it and just set the glue in there a little more. And then we can test out how that's looking with our pentagon. So this would get sewn on like so when you have the first pair of petals. So these would get sewn together, and then it would get sewn here. Now as you add more, because you have that straight line, you know, you'll be sewing to the straight line to that point that I had marked off. You don't have to sew all the way around, but just to there. And so you'd attach them in a similar way. After I finish a pair, I line them up, and if I can see, like in this one, they're not quite matching up. What it probably means is I didn't fold close enough to the paper, and I can feel that this little point can still fold down more. So what I can do is just undo the glue a bit, press it down. If I need to re-glue some more, I can. And then I'll just give it another press here. The glue is very forgiving. And then I can line it up again. And now I see that my two edges align. So down here aligns, and then the points meet. So just kind of check as you go and make adjustments as you need to. I'm going to make a few more pairs, and then I'll start sewing them. Okay, so here are my petal pieces. If you're curious to see the back, you can see there's just barely any of the paper, that brown paper, showing. As far as using this larger 3/8 inch seam allowance, I've got to say, with pieces this small, I probably would prefer to have the 1/4 inch. What is nice about it is if you have a larger glue stick, you know, you're more likely to cover the glue and not make a mess on the back of the paper, so that is nice. I could also see the 3/8 inch being handy on larger pieces you're cutting out, just as you're folding over, making sure that it's centered. But for small pieces like this, I think I would prefer the 1/4 inch, but not a big deal. Just giving my opinion as I piece with it. Now, it might provide that little extra bit of security when you sew them together as well. You know, there's a bigger distance between your sew lines and the edge of the fabric, so that perhaps could be another reason for the larger seam allowance, but really I think you can't go wrong with either. So I'm going to go ahead and start sewing these again by aligning the edges, placing them right sides together. I'll do my knicker knot on one end, whip stitch down, knicker knot on the other end. I'll do that with all those pieces, all the petal pairs, before attaching them to the pentagon. Petal pairs are sewn together, so now I'm going to start sewing them to the pentagon, just right sides together, knicker knot on each end. Been putting my middle finger kind of underneath the thread close to the needle. Seems to be helping to keep the thread from catching on corners and, you know, making those extra loops. Just guides the thread to stay up top, so you might find that's helpful. So again, if you just watch my middle finger, I'm just keeping it real close to the thread. And then Elise, in her demonstration videos, she just tucks the extra thread in the seam allowance before cutting it off. So I'll do that here and go grab my scissors. Okay. So I just came out in the seam allowance. And there's the first petals attached to the center. And now I'll just do the same, just attaching to the pentagons first. Alright, and just for efficiency's sake, instead of cutting the thread when I get to the edge of this second pair of petals, I'm going to sew up the sides just along the straight edge of the petal. So I'll show you what I mean. You just get to the edge and a couple more stitches here. Okay, so I'm at the edge. I have my pentagon and the edge is finished. So I'll do that knicker knot. I'm going to go to the left and then I'll go to the right. Make that knot, but instead of cutting it, I'm going to open and then I'm going to align these two petal pieces here. And I'm just going to, from the point of the pentagon, I'm just going to sew a straight line right about to here where the curve starts. So I'll go around at the start of the petals, and I'm going to just do a knicker knot here. So I'm going to go to the right. Oh, my thread came out. Let me rethread that. Okay, so I was going to go to the right this way, take the double strand, go to the left this time. Okay. And now I'm just gonna sew down the straight line of the petals. I'll stop when I reach the curve. Alright, so I'm at the end of the straight part of the curve, so I'm gonna just do a knicker knot here. I'll go over to the right, to the left, knot it, and then just tuck into the seam allowance and trim. So now I have a piece that looks like this, so it's not totally connected, obviously, because it starts to curve away from each other. I'm just going to press this now before connecting more. So I'll do the same thing. I'll start from this end and go across, and that way I can come up before cutting my thread. Again, just up the straight line here. So I'll go ahead and finish this now and talk about how I'm going to use these little May blossoms. Alright, there is my first finished May blossom using curved piecing and something besides a hexagon. If you're wondering why this was considered 1 inch, the hexagon side lengths are all 1 inch. So when you put the pair of petals together, their base is also 1 inch wide. So, you know, if you're looking at the template and wondering where is the 1 inch on here, that's where you get it, putting the two bases of the petals together. So my plan for these is to applique them on a neutral colored quilt. My grandma likes a quilt that I had made for my sister not too long ago that was made with neutral colors, and she just thought it was very elegant and pretty. But I also know she likes the cherry blossoms, and I thought that these May blossoms kind of resembled those. So I want to applique them kind of scattered like they're blowing in the wind along that quilt, which I haven't made yet, but that's my plan. So I'll just make these from time to time, and when I have enough, I will sew them onto that quilt, which I also have to make. So that's the plan for these, but I just wanted you to see some of these ways you can finish your shapes and connect the pieces and give you some inspiration for what you can do with those pieces. I believe this pattern also has smaller shapes that you can applique between the petals to get a more complete shape to make an actual block, but I'm not going to be doing that. I'm just going to applique around the edges like I demonstrated earlier in the video. So there you have it. A few more tips and tools and ideas to help make your English paper piecing journey go a little more smoothly. I hope you'll try those tips and share any more that you may have. Like I mentioned, the Knicker Knot, I had a hard time with the videos I saw, seeing exactly how it was done. So hopefully I did it justice, showing my attempt at the Knicker Knot. It does seem to hold very nicely, and again, just keep those stitches from coming undone. And again, trying other shapes besides the hexagons. I think hexagons are a great one to start with, a nice shape to use if you're a beginner. And this was my first attempt trying curves in a different shape, and it's very similar. Just knowing how to wrap it and, you know, knowing where to stop sewing. You just got to pay attention to the directions that come with your pattern, but it was pretty straightforward to do. You can see that larger seam allowance here versus the 1/4 inch seam allowance. I still think with smaller pieces I'm more of a fan of the 1/4 inch, but both work really well. Now this one isn't lying totally flat even after ironing it. I know when I applique it and remove the papers that should help, but something else I'm going to do is just close it in this little traveling mat set that I have. Maybe set some heavier books on top of it for a while to really flatten it out. And you know, like this one I did is very flat. But yeah, I think I'll just do that, see if I can get it as flat as can be. So go ahead and share any thoughts you have or any other questions you may have. I'll try my best to answer them as a confident beginner with English paper piecing. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.